When I was 15 years old, I was very fortunate to have an opportunity with our diocesan youth to go on a trip to England and Taizé. And it was on the England portion of this trip, while we were at Winchester Cathedral, that I received my call to ordained ministry. Now, this is a lot for anyone to take on, let alone someone who's 15. So I was really grateful that the second portion of our trip, that was in France, was at a community, an ecumenical community, that is a community that encompasses all different denominations of the Christian church. That I was at this ecumenical community called Taizé when I was trying to sort out what had just happened. Now, you may or may not have heard of Taizé before. A lot of people, when I hear them talk about Taizé, the first thing that they speak about is music. And the music involved in the worship there is very simple. Just a few chants, a few lines of chant that get repeated over and over until the Spirit basically says stop. But that's not what I think of, what first comes to mind when I think of Taizé from my own experience there. What I think of more are the silences. And in those silences, the silences that you're there with all these other people around you, silence is very real, very palatable. It's in those silences that I was able to stop, to think, to listen, to try to hear and feel what it was that God was saying to me at that time. One of the chief missions of Taizé is the work that they do with young people. They set up their community, their space, so that young people from all over the world can travel to Taizé as a place of pilgrimage, as a place of retreat and worship, a place to experience God even. Their goal is to open up their space, to open up their community, so that young people from throughout the world can come and experience the presence of God. This is what Taizé offers. And I'm continually grateful that they open their doors, not just to others, but to me as well, to go in and experience God in their space. This work of providing an opportunity to experience God's presence is really what we're all about as the church. It's what we hear about throughout our readings today. In Exodus, when we see Moses asking for a sign of God's favor, what he asked for as that sign is God's presence. And Moses doesn't just ask for this for himself. He asked for God's presence for all of God's people who are traveling with him. This thing that Moses is asking God for, It's the greatest gift he could ask for. It's the greatest thing that he would ask for this gift, not just for himself, but for others as well. When we as a church are doing things well, we are showing this gift of God's presence to all others around us. And this is what we see in 1 Thessalonians today. Paul is proud of the Thessalonians because they have been an example to others. In that example, as Paul tells us, in every place, your faith in God has become known. We might say of the Thessalonians that through their faith, God has been made known. And that's because through their example, others are able to see what it is our faith means. Through that faith, others come to know God for themselves. And through this work that we see in the Thessalonians, through their example, others in this world are able to feel the presence of God too. And just as through the good, God is able to be known, through the bad, God's presence becomes muddied and unclear. And this is in part what we see in the gospel today. There, Jesus is being tested in the various religious sects of his day. He tells them not to just render unto the emperor, or as sometimes we've heard it in the past, Caesar's, to render to the emperor or Caesar's what is the emperor or Caesar's. But Jesus also tells them, and more importantly, to render unto God the things that are God's. These people, these hypocrites as Jesus calls them, aren't doing that. They aren't giving to God the things that are God's. That's hurting them, and it's hurting those around them as well. Their focus is no longer on making God present, making God known. Making God known for the same way, making God known in the same way that the ancient Israelites in Moses' day were able to experience God's presence with them. No, their focus in Jesus' day now is simply on their own power and influence. Now, for those of us who have experienced God's presence, know that there is nothing greater. This is true whether we have experienced God in a manner similar to the form of the pillar of cloud that was there for the ancient Israelites, or even if we have seen God in a closer and more intimate way, as we see with Moses this morning. This is the gift that we should all long for. This is the gift that we should hope that others receive as well. As churches, we have a choice. We can be like the Thessalonians, or we can be like the Pharisees and Herodians who sought to test Jesus. We can make God's presence known to all those who we may meet, or we can make it harder, more difficult for them to know the Lord. Render unto God the things that are God's. This is what Jesus calls on us, what he tells us to strive to do. We are called to give God God's due. And in doing that, to help others know God all the more. The question for us is, are you doing that? Are we doing that? These are the questions we must ask ourselves always, so that we can make sure that God is known by our example, and that we are truly rendering to God those things that are God's.